We're very glad to have you here tonight as we present to you an honest inquiry into origins. My name is Kirk Hoffler. I'm the president for the Society for Creation Science here at UT. This organization is a campus organization which has been formed here and on a number of other college campuses throughout the nation in order to provide or to present to the academic community evidence which supports a recent creation origin. Tonight we're going to be turning our attention to evidence which is much closer to home, dealing directly with the origin of the earth. Now I'd like to say first off that I'm sure a lot of you are here from the natural sciences, and we welcome you. We're not here to deplore or to make fun of anyone, and we'd like you to know that you're welcome. We also very much welcome the faculty, who I'm sure has sacrificed time in order to come and be present for this presentation. A few things I'd like to mention before we begin is, one, the book, taking a historical approach of this subject by Dr. Gentry, is on sale at the tables on the far side over here. And you'll be more than welcome, if you'd like to go over and take a look or purchase one, to do so after the presentation. Our guest speaker tonight comes to us having conducted 13 years of research at Oak Ridge National Laboratory as a guest scientist. He has published over 20 articles in leading scientific journals, both here and abroad, that is, here in America and abroad, concerning his research. And I hope you'll find this to be an enjoyable and a challenging evening. I'd like to ask you to please welcome Dr. Robert Gentry.
Thank you. Happy to be with you this evening. Over 30 years ago, I was a freshman at the University of Florida, taking the freshman biology course. I ran into a topic called evolution. Previous to that time, I have to admit, I believed the conservative biblical account of creation. That is the Genesis account, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. But as I was confronted with evolution there at the University of Florida in my biology class, heard the persuasive arguments in favor of evolution, I began to think, could it possibly be that, science is really so much different than what I've grown up with? Well, I didn't become an evolutionist as a result of the biology course by itself, but as I continued to take physics courses at the University of Florida, I ran into courses in nuclear physics, and there I found that, of course, we could use techniques called radioactive dating to date the Earth. And from there to graduate school, taking courses in cosmology, and there I thought I learned the most beautiful theory I'd ever seen, the cosmological development of the universe from something called the Big Bang. Now, I'm sure just about everyone in the auditorium knows about the Big Bang. That's the most popular scientific explanation of how we got here tonight. Let's review it just briefly. Supposedly, 17 billion years ago, there was a gigantic explosion someplace in the universe. Now, I say explosion, that really isn't exactly correct because nothing existed before that time, presumably. But from some point in space where nothing existed before, matter came out. And as the matter came out, it was very hot. Particles developed, and a giant fireball formed, which began to expand and expand and expand for hundreds of thousands of years. And then a change took place in the temperature of the fireball so that it became less opaque. Well, to make a long story very, very short, from that giant primeval fireball developed, supposedly, stars. Now, it wasn't easy for me in that relativity course to understand how stars could form as a result of an explosion, because obviously if we have an explosion today, we don't see things coming back together again or accumulating. That wasn't easy for me to understand. It wasn't easy for me to understand how stars could collect into galaxies. In fact, the beautiful spiral galaxies, which are all over the universe. How did the order come about from something that was so random in its origin? So questions began to arise in my mind. But the greatest question of all concerned the beginning itself. How was it? As a physicist, I was taught in my undergraduate days that matter can neither be created or destroyed, and I'd accepted that. How is it that something came out of nothing at the Big Bang? Well, I pondered the question week after week, and one day in class, I guess I was whispering to some of my classmates just what's going on. And the professor, who was very cordial, probably realized what I was doing. In fact, he sensed a semi-rebellion in the class because of this, what I felt was a contradiction, and maybe I'd influenced other people. Anyway, he stopped the class one day in the technical presentation, and he said, I suppose that you're wondering about this situation of the Big Bang. How did it all begin? In fact, I'd raised some questions about it. He said, well, earlier, back in the 1930s, late 1920s, there was a Belgian scientist, a priest, a Catholic priest, Georges Lemaitre. And Lemaitre had the idea that the Big Bang actually began by the finger of God. And that's what started it all. And I thought, well, what a wonderful explanation. Here we can combine science and the entrance of God into the universe. And so from then on, no matter what was said in the cosmology course, I personally was able to put God into the picture, and before the course was over, I had become fully and completely atheistic evolutionist. I believed in the Big Bang, the development of the universe. Now, at that time, it wasn't 17 billion years ago. In fact, the final examination for the course was to calculate the time of the Big Bang from some of the cosmological parameters that were presumably known at that time or presumably guessed at that time. And I did. In fact, I still have the final examination from that course. I did well on it according to the professor. I calculated something like 5.2 billion years for the origin of the Big Bang. He was happy and I was happy. And I left the University of Florida with a master's degree in physics, thinking that I had solved, or at least of my own thinking, I'd put together a God of science and a God of truth. I retained a belief in the Bible, at least somewhat, believing that now the 6 days of creation were no longer literal days, but were vast geological periods of time. In other words, I'd become like most people are today in terms of how they consider their origin. I'd become a believer in biological evolution as well. And when I went to work in the defense industry at that time, I remember people would argue. Some people would argue about evolution. And I was vehement. I defended evolution at every turn. For years. Later down the road, a few years later, someone confronted me with another part of the Bible. It's part of the Ten Commandments. And it has in it the creation story written all over again. If you want to read it sometime, it's in Exodus, the 20th chapter, and around verse number 11. It's part of the Ten Commandments. You see, up until this time, I had been able to marry a God of truth with a God of science by this way of believing in the Big Bang and believing that Genesis was some sort of story that was not really meant to be true. But now it seemed to me there was something more here. I was dealing with a moral issue. And it began to bother me considerably. It bothered me for years. And as a result of that, I decided I had to go back and start to do some investigating for myself. And investigating myself, I wanted to go back to the grassroots, so to speak, of why I believe what I believe. Why did I accept what I did about the Big Bang, about the age of the earth, about biological evolution, and so forth? So I got some books, or at least I tried to find books, and they were very few and far between. This is now 25, 26, 27, 28 years ago. And I couldn't find very much. Everything seemed to confirm what I had been taught at the University of Florida. But one day I came across a book